All right, this short video is going to cover language disorders, so basically just a little detour into the neuropsychology of language before we pivot back in topic 9 into the fully cognitive stuff about language and its relationship to thought in general and things like that. So thinking about language disorders or the neuropsychology of language, we know that there are a number of different areas involved when we do language, and you've probably heard of at least a couple of those. So the two big ones that we're going to focus primarily on are Wernicke's area and Broca's area. And so I'll explain what those are, but I want to make it clear there are a number of other areas, as we'll see in a little bit, that are involved in language production. Even if you just look at this very simplified chart here in the bottom left, connecting these two areas, the Wernicke's area and Broca's area, you can see that there's a big set of wires, a big set of neurons, right? So these nerve fibers connecting those two areas. And that's important for language production, even though it's not those two areas themselves. So it's called the arcuate fasciculus. And if that gets damaged, then we also will have trouble with language. As we'll see, there's other parts of the brain that the information in these two areas gets sent to, or gets other information from. So if those connections get damaged or those other parts of the brain get damaged, then it also can affect some language functions. That said, these two areas are the ones that are most central and important for language. So Wernicke's area, we'll start with this one further to the back. Wernicke's area is located in the temporal lobe. So remember, that's the lobes that are on kind of the side of your brain by your ears or by your temples. It's where initially information from the auditory sense comes in. So info from your ears. The first place it really goes in the brain is the auditory cortex, which is kind of deep in the temporal lobe towards the top of it. And right near the auditory cortex, just a little behind it, is Wernicke's area. And the main function of this area, you could say it's incredibly important for language comprehension. And remember, comprehension is the ability to understand language. So you might even put this strongly with understanding the meaning of individual words. That would be something that Wernicke's area is really important for. I'll also note that what we're seeing here, you're seeing this head on the bottom left here, you're seeing this head from the left side, and they do that on purpose. This is the left hemisphere of the brain, because Wernicke's area is actually in the left hemisphere. There isn't an exact copy. It's not like most of our lobes. I talked about there being a left half and a right half. So there is an equal brain area over there on the right hemisphere, but it's not called Wernicke's area, and it doesn't do the same thing. It's not quite as important for language. So there is stuff being shared with that side of the brain, and we do get some right hemisphere activity during language functions, but not nearly as much. So most of what we'll be looking at here is in the left hemisphere. So Wernicke's area is left hemisphere. The other area I'll focus on is Broca's area in the frontal lobe. So it's kind of towards the back of the frontal lobe, a little bit down inside of it here. And that is important for the production of language. And when I say the production, I mean kind of it's like prepping and coordinating the muscles, the motor movement that's required to actually just move your articulators, to flap your lips and move your tongue and control your vocal cords and breathing and all of that. That stuff is like getting signals, getting commands from Broca's area. It makes sense because that's near the motor cortex, right? We talked about the back of the frontal lobe having this strip called the motor cortex that's for controlling voluntary movement, voluntary motor commands, sending those signals out down the spinal cord to the muscles of the body. Well, Broca's area is basically the speech, like doing the speech part of that, or coordinating like speech, planning out what I'm going to say before I'm going to say something else, so that I can then send the commands to the motor cortex to go and send those commands out to my mouth, my tongue, and so on. So you can kind of see that in the diagram on the bottom right here. Broca's area is kind of planning out how I'm going to move my lips and what order and how I'm going to put all those sounds together. But then those commands go to the motor cortex so that the motor cortex can actually send the signals out to the muscles of the body. In this case, maybe muscles in the face, right? And then like like you can see if you're following the rest of this picture here, if someone's talking to you and the sound goes into your ears, it's going to go into your temporal lobe. They kind of took a shortcut here. It should actually go first to the auditory cortex inside the temporal lobe here, but then it quickly goes from there to Wernicke's area right nearby in the back of the temporal lobe, and then that information gets shared. So it takes the arcuate fasciculus, the connecting fibers, gets shared with the frontal lobe, gets shared with Broca's area second. So when language sounds come into your ears, it goes Wernicke's first, then Broca's, and then that allows you to go and give a response and speak back to the person. So Broca's area also located in the left part of the brain, left frontal lobe. Again, there is brain matter over on the right side in the right hemisphere that's analogous to this, but it's not Broca's area, and it's not really that important for language. Now, this is why you might have heard, or actually we talked about earlier in the semester, that the left hemisphere is really important for language. It's not that the right hemisphere isn't involved at all, but it's not as essential. And in fact, even if you have widespread right hemisphere damage, you often will have pretty intact language function overall. Whereas if you have widespread left hemisphere damage, you often lose all or large parts of language function. So yeah, the right hemisphere also participates or activates during language tasks, but not nearly as much as the left hemisphere. Now, that means because we got these brain areas that are kind of dedicated, this network of brain areas that are dedicated to language functions, that means that if those areas get damaged, for example, through a stroke or a tumor or an infection or a traumatic brain injury or anything like that, then we end up with conditions that may impair language skills. So the broadest type of disorder of language is called an aphasia. There are a variety of different aphasias, and we're going to learn about two of those. I'll mention some others at the end of these slides, but I won't test you on those. I'm only going to test you on the main two. But there are two types of aphasia. These are speech-language disorders that are caused generally by brain damage to those areas. And that means, obviously, then left hemisphere damage usually. So let's talk about one of these. It's expressive aphasia. This is a problem with the ability to express language, to get language out. In other words, the production is damaged. The production of language is impaired. So this is often called Broca's aphasia. This is what happens if Broca's area gets damaged. That area in the frontal lobe that is doing the coordinating, not just of our articulators, but kind of the coordinating and planning of what I'm going to say before what else, what words come before what others. In other words, kind of the syntactical part of language, the syntax, right? Knowing that I need to put this word in front of that word and that kind of hierarchical ordering and combination. Broca's area is really important for that. That's part of production too. It's not just literally the coordinating of the muscles, the motor movement, but also the coordinating of this word goes before that word, creating syntactic structure. That's what Broca's area does. So when it's damaged, we see patients who have problems with that, problems getting language out, problems producing it. They understand other people's language, and they understand the meaning of words. They may have some confusion, especially if someone's saying a complicated sentence. They will have issues because they'll have some troubles with like the syntax, for example, if it's complicated, but they do understand the meaning of words. So basic comprehension isn't really as impaired. But what you'll find is kind of when they try and produce speech, you get a labored, a really stilted speech, or short, non-grammatical kind of like almost really childlike, toddler-like sentences sometimes, or just trouble getting it out. And again, it's not that they don't understand what the individual words mean. So they still have just as large a vocabulary as always. They're just having trouble activating that, getting it out, or putting them together in order. So, for example, here's a real quote from a patient who was trying to describe the stroke he had. It happened when he was in a hot tub. So here's how he described it. He said, "All right, stroke, and I to want a guy hot tub, and the 2 days when hospital and ambulance." So you can see it's a very labored, stilted speech. I have trouble getting it out, but he's using the right words. He's talking about hot tub. He's talking about an ambulance. He's talking about 2 days ago. He says stroke. Like, he literally understands the words. His understanding of language is okay. Just really trouble getting it out and trouble making it into full sentences, right? In more extreme versions, there are even patients. Broca's most famous patient, Broca's the one who discovered this aphasia, hence it's named after him. One of his most famous patients had trouble getting out any word other than tan, like could only really say that one word. So that's a pretty extreme version. That's not normally what we see in Broca's aphasia, but it's this problem getting language out. To get a little more detailed here, with expressive aphasia, this inability to express language, right, this production problem, patients will often speak with short but meaningful sentences that are produced with great effort. So what you notice, like in that example we saw a minute ago, and I'll show you a video in just a moment here, but what you'll notice is they'll often neglect small connecting words like is, and the. So they end up with this, like I said, more toddler-like sentences. They may say walk dog, right? Instead of I will walk the dog, all those little connecting words that make it much more clear syntactically what you're talking about. So if a patient like this says walk dog, the problem is it's really hard to know if they mean I will take the dog for a walk, or you take the dog for a walk, or the dog walked there, right? What do they mean by walk dog? But they're using the right words. They are talking about a dog and walking. Now, what gets a little interesting, a little subtle here, that's often missed when this is covered in something like an intro psychology course, is we may talk about Broca's aphasia as being a problem just of syntax, but or that they can still understand language. Like we say, Broca's area is for production of language. So if it's damaged, they lose production, but they keep comprehension, right? That's what makes Broca's area and Wernicke's area have this very clear double dissociation, which is we talked about with cognitive neuroscience, meaning two areas that have two different functions. And we know that because a patient might have damage to one area, like Broca's area, and they lose production of language, but they keep comprehension of language. And then you got Wernicke's area, where if it gets damaged, they lose comprehension of language. They don't understand it anymore, but they can still produce it, as we'll see. They can still make language, they just can't understand it. That story mostly is true, and that's a good way in general to think about those two aphasias, but there's a subtlety here where even people with Broca's aphasia, generally you would think that as just problems with producing language, they may have some problems with understanding too, if it's about understanding subtle syntax. So, for example, patients with Broca's aphasia, they could understand a sentence like, the apple was eaten by the girl, because they understand what apples are, they understand what girls are, and they understand what the verb eaten means. So when they're looking at this sentence, they basically don't need the syntax. To understand what's going on in this sentence, to understand the meaning of what's going on with these main words here, you don't need to put them in the right order. Whether it's girl eaten apple, or apple eaten girl, or apple girl eaten, or any combination of those, it's very clear what's going on, so they can understand that sentence. They don't need really syntax to be able to make sense of it. But if you give them a more subtle sentence like, the boy was pushed by the girl, that's when these patients have trouble. Because again, they don't really have, they have trouble with the meaning, the syntax of using these connecting words, things going in a certain order, that sort of phrase structure, grammar, that's the kind of stuff that their brain isn't doing automatically anymore. So what they have now is the noun boy and the noun girl and a verb push, but it's very hard for them to understand. They'll actually get confused whether the boy is pushing the girl or the girl is pushing the boy. They understand some pushing happened between a boy and a girl, but they don't know which is which because they have trouble with syntax. So this is one kind of subtle way in which with Broca's aphasia you do actually get some problems with comprehension, even though their Wernicke's area works. And that's why I say language is a network, and sometimes the story we get in intro psychology about these two brain areas is pretty oversimplified. But we'll stick to the basics and say, yeah, Broca's area is mostly about just producing language. Wernicke's area is mostly about comprehending language. So let's switch to that other one then. Let's switch to Wernicke's area. What happens if Wernicke's area, the one back in the temporal lobe on the left side, what if it gets damaged? If Wernicke's area gets damaged, we get a different form of aphasia, Remember, aphasia is just like a language or speech disorder. And in the case of Wernicke's area being damaged, what we get is receptive aphasia. So it's a problem with receiving language. It's a problem with being able to understand language when, say, people are speaking to you, for example. This also, by the way, in case you're curious, like this also leads to problems with understanding written language or signed language. These areas of the brain are for language in general, so they're actually recruited whether we're talking about signed, written, or spoken language. There is some dissociations in the brain between those, so they don't perfectly overlap. But in general, if Wernicke's area is damaged, you will have trouble with sign language as well. And the trouble here, when Wernicke's area gets damaged, we also call this Wernicke's aphasia then, because that's the person who discovered it, then you just get general trouble understanding language or understanding meaning in general. So even individual words don't mean anything anymore. You can speak to the person, and for a minute it might even sound like, or for a brief bit, it might even sound like they still have language, because they'll produce what kind of sounds like sentences. It has the flow, the prosody of a sentence. We call it fluent. It's fluent speech, so it's sentence-like. It's grammatical sounding, like they're organizing things syntactically as they produce and get those sentence-like sounds out. But the problem is the actual individual words they choose tend to be meaningless and often disorganized. And this is a symptom we call word salad. You might have heard that for other psychological conditions, but this is a condition, sort of a side effect of just this general damage to that language area of the brain. So here's an example, an actual quote from a patient. It just suddenly had a pfeffert, and all the pfeffert had gone with it. It even stepped my horn. They took them from earth, They make my favorite 9 to severed, and now I'm been habbed by the stem of the formant of my annulment, which is now forever. So they're using like words here that don't seem right, or might not even be words at all, and yet the flow is kind of sentence-like. They took them from the earth, Like that sounds like that's basically a sentence. It's just with the wrong words, or like they don't understand what they're saying. They're not getting actual meaning across. So they're almost just like mimicking speech, but without understanding it, the way a parrot, for example, mimics speech. It's kind of like that. So, okay, I'm going to show you a couple of videos of patients, and I'll have you try and guess from the symptoms that you're seeing, from the way they're talking, what type of aphasia they might have. Remember, the two options are Broca's aphasia, which is that problem producing speech, expressive aphasia, problems with expression, or there's Wernicke's aphasia, also called receptive aphasia, because they have trouble receiving or comprehending speech. They have trouble with the incoming, and that also means they just don't understand the meaning of words. They use the wrong words. So here's one patient. Here's an example.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talked with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. But they'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
we
get to
will
Juneau.
store it right here, and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
With the iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. With happy. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was very good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for us. Other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hand for him. Sometime. Am I talk of any more to saying?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope the world lasts for you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
So that's an example of a patient with one of those types of aphasia, and I'll give you a second to try and think about what that might be. Notice that when he was speaking, it came out with kind of the sound of sentences, the flow of sentences, but he was definitely not using the right words. He didn't understand when she was talking about iPad and things like that. He didn't understand what those words, what those sounds were referring to. He can repeat them, but he's not actually using the right words or understanding what the conversation is about. So this is an example of someone who has damage to Wernicke's area. So he has receptive aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia. And you'll notice he did use kind of some familiar or some like common phrases in there. So the brain might often, like once you sort of start a little bit of phrase going, it'll finish a bit of the phrase, but it'll be out of context, the wrong phrase, or they won't understand what they're saying, even if they do get a phrase out that kind of fits the context. They don't actually understand what they're saying. With the Wernicke's aphasia, it's sad. There's often a lack of insight into the condition. In other words, a lack of recognition that they have these problems in general. So you could see he didn't seem to be frustrated. It's kind of nice. He didn't seem to be frustrated because he didn't necessarily realize that anything was going wrong. He's getting these social behaviors with another person of the same species, right? And so he's smiling. He sees smiling. He'll smile. He's interacting, but he's not really communicating linguistically anymore, right? It's not actual language communication. The other kind of big downside or worry with Wernicke's aphasia is there's not as much promise for recovery or treatment. Certainly there's a lot of treatment speech-language pathologists can do to help, and in general, just adjustments to life or activities of daily living. But with Wernicke's aphasia, it doesn't recover quite as easily or as commonly as the other type we'll see, Broca's aphasia. So let's watch a video of another patient, and obviously this is going to be the other aphasia. So this will be Broca's aphasia, the one where they have trouble getting speech out or producing it. So it's expressive aphasia, right? Problems with expressing language. You'll see that she uses the right words. You're going to see a patient here looking at a picture describing what she sees, and she sees a picture with a boy and a girl, and I mean, the things she is talking about are the things in the picture. She just has trouble getting the words out, and she certainly isn't putting them together into complete sentences using syntax.
And stool is a boy is it landing down. Girl is laughing, and cookie jar window, curtains, and out the garden, and trees, low grass, and lady washing the dishes, and hot and cold water plashing, running floor, and two cups of
So if you want to watch the rest of this video or other videos like it, you can, as always, click the source link. I always have a link to the YouTube copy of the videos I put in the slides. You can watch more of that. But that's Broca's aphasia. You can see she especially struggled to get the right words out, but she did use the right words. There are times where she could get little snippets of syntax, little snippets of sentences or phrases together. Okay, this is probably a fairly mild version of Broca's aphasia, of that expressive aphasia, or she's been getting maybe some treatment for a while. You see this commonly in older people because strokes are more common in older people. So you'll see aphasia as a symptom of that. So yeah, that's Broca's aphasia. One positive note is Broca's aphasia is a little more, it responds a little better to treatment, again, by like a professional, like a speech-language pathologist. Broca's aphasia has a higher rate of recovery and a little easier to treat. And that's probably because they still understand the language, like in their head, they still understand the meaning of the words. They're just having trouble getting it out, but that's something you can do. You can practice more and more. And you know, as long as you have a little bit of that ability, you can build on it. So what I want to finish with the last couple bits here is I'm going to show you an example of a patient who's been getting treatment by a speech-language pathologist, so you can see over time across the years of treatment. This is not necessarily a fast thing, but across the years of treatment, you can see this patient progress and get better, even though she never gets back to normal. But you'll see her progress. And then after these recovery videos of this one patient, then I'll talk a little more about some other types of aphasias that you won't be tested on, and that'll be the rest of the video. So here we go. This is Sarah, who has recently had a stroke, I think, during class. So she was in class and started having some symptoms and ended up with Broca's aphasia.
Okay. So what's your name?
Scott. Oh, no. Sarah Scott.
That's right. And how old are you?
I can't.
Try.
I can't.
Oh. You're not.
So she understands how old she is. She does know her age. She just has trouble getting out that number and trouble, getting to like the correct number without some sort of prompting. And you'll see often with patients like this, especially with a little bit of treatment, they may try and use other ways of like priming themselves or getting close to that word that they're having trouble getting out. So sometimes they'll try writing, or someone else could try prompting them by saying like 17, 18, and then she'll be able to say her age of 19. So you'll see her kind of trying to use this tool here to get around her impairment. So let's, okay.
19. Yeah. And what happened to you?
Stroke.
You had a stroke last year.
Yes.
And what happened? Can you remember what happened?
School and English class.
Okay.
And I book and I read it aloud, but I can't because stroke, and so I stand there, and also it's the same as the same kind of thing as you know.
Pins and needles.
Yeah,
like pins
the
and
same, and also arm as well.
Leg.
Leg. Yeah.
And what happened after the stroke with your speech?
Well, I can't.
You have speech problems.
Yeah.
Do you know what that's called?
Yeah. Aphasia.
Yeah, good. I haven't heard you say the word before.
I write it down.
And that helps?
Yeah.
Okay. So you are going to go to university. What are you doing now? What do you do now? Every day?
Oh, speech, the speech.
Therapy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also riding.
Riding what?
Oh. Horses.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so we'll stop this video. There are a lot more. There's more to this video. Again, you can click through to YouTube if you want to watch the rest of this. But I want to move on to her years of recovery in the following couple of videos. Couple things to note here. She's using the right words. She's getting them out, right? And you might see her using that pad and paper and writing it out and say, oh, does language still work? Like, could they just write? Could they sit down and write an essay or write a novel? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Someone with Broca's aphasia can't put together syntactic sentences, whether it's speech or writing. But like I said before, they do understand the individual words. Their Wernicke's area is working, so they comprehend language and the meaning of words in general. So she is basically like using that writing in the same way that she might struggle but eventually be able to get the word out of her mouth. She can struggle and maybe get the word onto paper. And so it's just trying multiple different ways to get to that word that she already knows somewhere in her head, to get it out through one muscle system or another. But it doesn't mean that they could sit down and write syntactically and produce full sentences, because that is a problem they have, whether it's with speech or writing. It's a general language problem. That's why this is a cognitive thing, right? This is about the brain. This is not just about like the vocal cords or something like that. So let's look at Sarah a little later. Again, you saw, or she mentioned at the end of that last video, she was going to go to college, but she no longer was able to go to college after that stroke in high school in English class. So she ended up doing speech therapy all the time, and also, as you saw, she was riding horses. I think that was part of a therapy program for people with issues like this. So here's her 16 months later. Oops, let's watch that.
Hello. Okay, so this is our second video, and this is September. So it's June, July, August, September. It's about 16 months since you had a stroke. So last time I asked you what your name was and how old you are. So what's your name?
My name is Sarah Scott.
Good. And how old are you?
No. Oh, 18. No. Oh.
Do you want to write it down, or will that help?
No. I already. 19.
18, 19...
20.
Hooray! Yes, you're 20. You had your birthday the other week, so you haven't been 20 very long. And what have you been doing today?
Riding. But instead of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's Monday, Tuesday.
That's right, going on a different day.
Yeah, and it's good because riding around and like more.
Doing more things.
Yeah.
It's still riding for the disabled, but you're doing more challenging things.
And also I can, like, Monday I can, kind of...
Monday morning you can help to muck out.
And things, so
that's a really nice hobby to have, isn't it?
Yeah.
And not only that, you've started back at work for a few hours a week, haven't you?
Waitrose,
Shelf stacking. Very exciting.
But it's good, and like just talking and so it's good to
And they've given you a badge, haven't they? What does the badge say?
It says stroke and speech problems.
So you can see she's actually quite a bit recovered relative to that last video, and it's only been 16 months since the stroke at this point. And that's, like I said, people with Broca's aphasia definitely have more recovery, easier recovery, and respond better to treatment than those with Wernicke's aphasia. You'll also have noticed that she does have insight into her problem. Even from the start, she knows that she had a stroke. She understands what's going on, and she understands that she's having trouble getting words out. Unlike that patient with Wernicke's aphasia who seemed to have no insight that anything was wrong during this conversation. He felt like he was having this kind of social interaction, but he wasn't actually languaging with people, right? People with Broca's aphasia, they understand that they have this speech language disorder, and thus I think that they're a little easier to get treatment. So we'll watch one more follow-up video with her. This is quite a few years later. You heard in the end of that last video she got a little bit of a part-time job as a shelf stacker, but here you'll hear her speech language issues are quite a bit better, even though she maybe never gets fully back to what would have been normal otherwise. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Sarah Scott. It was my stroke anniversary last week, and I had my stroke 7 years ago, which is a long time. It is a long time. And last year was lots and lots of changes. Better good changes, I think. Well, I know. Or one of the things, I was working at the school, not full time, and I always wanted to have, one of the goals to have a full-time job, even though it would be difficult because I'm still tired all the time, really. That I kind of realised that I can do it, and I actually have found a job, and I did an interview, which is basically the first interview I've ever done, really, and it was very, very scary, really, because they didn't know that I had a stroke, they didn't know that I had aphasia, and they were really, really understanding when I actually said that I had a stroke, and they didn't know what aphasia is, so I was saying what that is, and they actually said that there's 2 jobs, and they were really pleased with me, which is good, and they said you can pick one of the jobs, and so I'm working full time now, which is amazing, and I'm really pleased. I'm working at Glaxo now, and my job is basically making buffers, like solutions and stuff like that, which is really good because I don't really read and write a lot, and that's good for me because obviously my speech is a bit better, but my reading and writing is still difficult. There's still challenges to do with emails and stuff like that.
So again, if you want to watch the rest of the video, she gets more into her symptoms and her life and things like that. You can follow the YouTube link there, but you can see her, as she just said, like her speech has gotten way better compared to the first video and even the second video. Like she was just speaking so much more fluently. She can hold a fairly normal conversation. She can pass a job interview, things like that, hold a full-time job. But as she mentioned, like she's still, even 7 years later and continued speech therapy for all those years, she still has issues with reading and writing and emails, like basically, especially with complicated syntax, like there may be lifelong struggles with that. So that's Broca's aphasia. Again, that is expressive aphasia, where they still have comprehension because Wernicke's area still works. So they still have comprehension of language, of meaning, but they'll have trouble getting language out, and especially like using syntax kind of put things together in the right order, complex combinations, hierarchical organization of language pieces. One thing I want to point out before we finish this stuff on Sarah is you'll notice in the first video she mentioned she felt tingly in her right arm and her right leg when she had that stroke in English class. And I would kind of, just to connect this to earlier material, ask like which half of the brain controls feeling and motor commands for the right arm and the right leg. In other words, which half of the brain would feel that tingly stuff in the right arm and the right leg, and which half of the brain like controls moves around the right arm and the right leg. And hopefully you remember that would be due to contralateral wiring. It would be the left hemisphere of the brain. So it kind of all fits together with what we know earlier. The fact that she mentioned this tingling in her right arm and her right leg tells us something might be going wrong in the left part of her brain. And so we could predict that might also go along with, if depending on the areas it hits, that might go along with damaging those language areas because they're located, most of them are located, the biggest, most important parts of the language network are located in the left hemisphere. So here's just another picture of that same kind of thing we've talked about. You can see here they've labeled AC, that's the auditory cortex. That's where information first comes in from your ears, the first kind of main area in the brain that processes sound signals. And you can see that it quickly sends the signals to multiple areas, but one of the main areas it goes is back here, still in the temporal lobe, to Wernicke's area. And then that has these connections with the arcuate fasciculus. It has some connections to frontal areas like Broca's area up here. And of course, those are corresponding, sending signals back and forth with like general motor cortex, but also throughout the parietal lobe, so we can communicate, kind of combine with other sensory information. And then there's the blue arrows, by the way, these are all sort of, we'd call them dorsal pathway areas. Remember that dual stream model we talked about with vision? Same kind of thing here. This is the dorsal areas, but there are also some ventral communication, some signaling back and forth in these ventral pathways. And that's actually how we get most of the connections between the left hemisphere, which you see on the left here, and the right hemisphere, is some of these areas back here in the sort of back end of the temporal lobe. Those have some communication by going through the middle of the brain and going across the corpus callosum. They connect with a similar area in the right hemisphere that is also active during language tasks. And of course, it makes sense that the things you hear in your left ear end up largely in your right hemisphere over here in the auditory cortex, but that's still important for language, so it needs to be able to share that information and send it across to the other side of the brain. You need this back and forth communication so that things you hear with both ears can get into the primary language processing areas. So yeah, most aphasia, as I mentioned, it's due to left hemisphere damage because that's where the two most important areas are, and like large parts of this whole language network are just left hemisphere only. So yeah, with Sarah, she had Broca's aphasia, and Broca's error is in the left hemisphere. That's why she felt problems with the right half of her body. Now, the last thing I'll end with is just a quick mention of a couple other types of aphasia. You won't be tested on this. I just want to mention, since I'm only covering the main two, but I know some people who take psychology or major in psychology have an interest in speech-language pathology. So you might already know there are a few different other types of aphasia. This is the best attempt. It's not perfect, but there's a decent attempt to kind of map out the different types of aphasia we see in a way that kind of breaks it down into just a few different symptoms, kind of, or combinations of symptoms. So at the first part of this flowchart, up here at the top, the question is, do they have fluent speech or not? In other words, when they speak, does it come out with kind of the flow of sentences, the way Byron on that cruise was speaking the wrong words, but speaking kind of sentence-like, or does it come out non-fluent, like stuttered, stilted, like trouble getting the words out? So that's the first like yes or no that breaks it up into 4 types of aphasia and 4 other types of aphasia. And then the second question is, do they have comprehension? Can they understand? Like if someone talks to them, can they understand what's being said? And so you get yes for some of those patients who may have not fluent speech, but they do understand, and you can see that'll get us down to our familiar Broca's aphasia. And then on the other side, you've got those who did have fluent speech, right? So they are able to make these kind of speech or sentence-like flows, combos of words, but they don't understand the words themselves. So they don't have comprehension, the no on our comprehension question. That leads us down to Wernicke's aphasia, the one we talked about, where they have a lack of comprehension, damage to comprehension, but they still can produce speech. They can get it out and combine it together in a kind of syntaxy way. But as we see, the exceptions to those, or the other types, would be someone like in the most extreme version, we have global aphasia. So really widespread left hemisphere damage can lead to very severe problems with all aspects of language, where they have trouble producing or comprehending language, like almost just a total loss of language, like major troubles. There's also mixed aphasia. It's kind of like Broca's aphasia. It's actually down here near Broca's aphasia, right? But there's problems with comprehension as well. So there's some limited comprehension in addition to lacking the ability to produce and get speech out. They also have trouble comprehending words. The one thing they can do is they can repeat someone else. They can copy someone else. So someone else might say some words and they can copy them, but they don't necessarily understand what they're saying, and they have trouble getting out like their own sets of words. That'd be mixed aphasia. There's also transcortical, so across cortex motor aphasia. In this case, they can understand language and they can even copy someone else, but the problem is they still have that effortful production. So it's a lot of problems with coordinating the motor system, coordinating the motor parts of getting the speech out. Over on the right side here, so this is those who do have kind of fluent speech. They'll speak in that kind of word salad, but kind of sounds like sentences. Similar to Wernicke's aphasia, there's what's called transcortical sensory aphasia. And so that's where there's trouble understanding. They don't have comprehension, right? They don't understand the meaning of individual words, but they'll fluently produce this word salad. The big difference between Wernicke's aphasia and that is they're really good at copying like words and phrases. So if someone asks them a question, they don't understand the words the person is saying, but they can repeat those words, and actually they might just repeat the question rather than understanding and answering the question. So it's a symptom called echolalia. And then finally, there's like conduction aphasia. This is like if the arcuate fasciculus gets damaged, they may be able to understand and even so they may mostly understand speech. So comprehension is kind of there, and they'll produce fluent speech, but kind of meaningless. They have trouble putting the two together. So they can understand language, they can understand what someone else is saying, but they can't really send that information forward to Broca's area. Now, Broca's area still works. This is, again, the problem is with that connection between the two areas. So Wernicke's area works. They understand language. Broca's area works. They can combine things together into these fluent sentence-like syntactic structures, but they're not sending a connection between the two. So actually what they're producing out of Broca's area is meaningless speech because they're not actually getting a connection with that understanding they do have back there in the back of the brain. The front of the brain that's producing the speech is not actually using the info that the back, where it understands language, has access to. So they have trouble, especially like finding words, and at that point, even difficulty copying words or phrases. And then there's the mildest form, and often the mildest form of aphasia, anomic aphasia. So lack of naming things. So milder production problem. It's really just trouble finding the right nouns or verbs. This may be due to less widespread damage or something like that. But those are different types of aphasia. As I said, there's quite a few types, but the main ones we're interested in, the ones most well known for neuropsychology, would be Broca's aphasia, again, also called expressive aphasia because they have trouble expressing or producing language, and Wernicke's aphasia, also called receptive aphasia because they have trouble receiving or comprehending language when other people talk. So that is the end of the language disorders and aphasia stuff. If you have questions, put us on the discussion board or send me an email, and we'll move on to topic 9 shortly, which will be the rest of our language psycholinguistics topics. We'll get into language and thought, embodied cognition stuff related to language, and a little about language in animals.